Taliban and Pakistani forces have traded fire across the Afghan border, with Taliban officials saying their forces captured 3 Pakistani military outposts.
Afghanistan says it has killed dozens of Pakistani soldiers in overnight border operations.
This is now by far the biggest terrorism threat that Pakistan has been facing in over a decade.
The war between the Taliban and Pakistan has begun. And within hours, the Taliban has claimed to kill more than 58 Pakistani soldiers and seize control of nearly 25 vital border posts. According to the Taliban, this is retaliation against Pakistani airstrikes in the capital of Kabul. What started as a border skirmish now threatens to explode into total war, as both sides look to destroy each other. International powers are paying close attention, because thousands of US-made armored vehicles, machine guns, and stockpiles of ammunition were left behind in Afghanistan in 2021. And now these lethal assets have become the Taliban's arsenal, while Pakistan is fighting with Chinese-made weapons that they have recently bought. Another important thing everyone is keeping an eye on is the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact that both countries signed weeks ago. Under this agreement, both nations promised collective security, meaning an attack on one is treated as an attack on both. Saudi Arabia explicitly pledged to defend Pakistan from external threats, exactly like the one Pakistan is dealing with right now. That means this has the potential to start another war in the Middle East, right as Hamas and Israel sign a ceasefire. This all started on October 11th. Taliban fighters unleashed a storm of gunfire across the Durand line, instantly catching thousands of Pakistani soldiers by surprise. Unverified audio leaks claim many abandoned their posts almost immediately, but some didn't even get the chance to fight back and were buried under the rubble of their own outposts. You see, Afghanistan and Pakistan share this massive 1,622-mile-long border known as the Durand Line, a colonial-era boundary recognized internationally but never fully accepted by Afghanistan. Every few months, fighters cross and recross it. Bullets fly, and things eventually cool down, but not this time. Right before midnight, Taliban fighters stormed into Pakistan in at least 7 different regions, stretching all the way from the hills of Helmand province in the south to the rugged mountain ranges of Kunar and Nangarhar in the east. Pakistan, so far, has not activated its pact with Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis have only issued cautious statements calling for calm, urging both sides to dial down the tensions, and encouraging dialogue. In the immediate aftermath, neither the Taliban nor Pakistan is admitting how this whole conflict actually started, because, frankly, they've been going back and forth like this for ages. Just 72 hours before this clash, explosions shook Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Witnesses reported sudden and intense Pakistani airstrikes at multiple locations, including Abdul Haq Square. Other Afghanistan provinces like Khost, Jalalabad, and Paktika also faced similar strikes. Within hours, the Taliban government was already blaming Pakistan for violating Afghan sovereignty. Now, according to Afghan sources, these airstrikes were specifically aimed at Nur Wali Masood, a high-ranking leader of the Taliban-Pakistan, commonly known as the Pakistan Taliban, or TTP. The TTP is an extremist militant group mostly based in Afghanistan, but actively conducts attacks across the border into Pakistan. Ever since the United States withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, allowing the Afghan Taliban to reclaim power, Pakistani officials secretly hoped this shift would finally stabilize their troubled western border. Some even believe the Afghan Taliban, sharing religious ties, might help Pakistan by cracking down on TTP fighters. But instead, the exact opposite has happened. The Pakistani Taliban grew stronger, bolder, and became a bigger threat than ever before. After 2021, hundreds of TTP fighters who'd previously been hiding or inactive suddenly flooded back into Pakistan's tribal belt. Many of these militants had spent nearly a decade sheltering in Afghanistan, ever since the Pakistani army drove them out through heavy military offenses back in 2014. But now the situation is completely different. In fact, a United Nations assessment explicitly found that the TTP receives substantial logistical and operational support from the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, which is just a diplomatic way of saying that the Taliban government is enabling and actively helping the TTP. So yes, the Taliban providing safe havens to terrorists attacking Pakistan became a massive headache for Pakistan, which ironically had long provided safe havens for terrorists like Osama bin Laden. And as if that wasn't ironic enough, Pakistan also used to train and support the Taliban in the past, and now that training is causing them headaches. Throughout much of 2022, Pakistan's government, first under Prime Minister Imran Khan and later Shehbaz Sharif, tried desperately to negotiate with the TTP. The Afghan Taliban even stepped in to mediate during talks held in Kabul, but these negotiations ultimately went nowhere. Sure, a ceasefire was agreed on earlier in 2022, but it turned out to be symbolic at best, and attacks continued as usual. From the TTP's viewpoint, Pakistan hasn't kept its promises, like releasing imprisoned militants or withdrawing its forces from the tribal regions. Pakistan, on the other hand, accused the TTP of abusing the ceasefire to regroup, rearm, and further destabilize border areas. On one side, the TTP fighters relentlessly targeted Pakistani military convoys, security outposts, and even civilians, bombing markets, mosques, and bus stops. Pakistani forces, meanwhile, launched aggressive operations to counter them. Eventually, in November of 2022, the TTP abruptly ended the ceasefire and called on its militants to launch attacks wherever they could across Pakistan. Just a few days later, a TTP suicide bomber attacked a police patrol in Baluchistan, killing 4 officers and wounding 26 others. The following month, TTP gunmen ambushed police officers in Pakistan's northwest, killing 6 policemen in Laki Marat. Then, just before the new year, another suicide attacker detonated himself inside a packed mosque at the police headquarters in Peshawar, killing around 100 people, mostly police officers. It was one of the deadliest terror attacks in Pakistan in years, and it happened in one of the country's most heavily secured zones, showing just how deeply the militants had infiltrated local networks. Attacks this sophisticated simply don't happen without significant local support. In fact, 2024 was among the deadliest years Pakistan has experienced in over a decade. Even putting aside its conflict with India, Pakistan suffered more than 2,500 casualties from militant violence in 2024 alone, with soldiers, police, and civilians repeatedly targeted by bombings, ambushes, and suicide attacks, mainly concentrated along the border provinces adjacent to Afghanistan. In retaliation, Pakistan has carried out several airstrikes targeting TTP and Taliban fighters inside of Afghanistan. One of the earliest and most controversial attacks happened in April of 2022, barely 8 months after the Taliban regained control of Kabul. Based on intelligence that TTP militants were hiding in eastern Afghanistan, Pakistani jets conducted pre-dawn bombing raids on Khost and Kunar provinces. These airstrikes were meant to target terrorist hideouts, but instead, they went horribly wrong. Bombs flattened homes in several border villages, killing at least 41 civilians, mostly women and children. The attacks sparked widespread outrage among Afghans. The Taliban, still new to power and eager for international legitimacy, condemned Pakistan's strikes as blatant violations of Afghanistan's sovereignty and a disregard for innocent Afghan lives. Islamabad, however, showed little remorse. Pakistan's foreign ministry issued a strongly worded statement, not to apologize for civilian deaths, but to demand that the Taliban stop the TTP and other terrorists from using Afghan territory to launch attacks on Pakistan. From there, things only worsened. Over the next year and a half, this tit-for-tat violence escalated almost every single month. By late 2022 and 2023, Pakistani airstrikes inside Afghan territory became increasingly common, while the Afghan side responded with gun battles, ambushes, and bombings that turned into nearly daily occurrences along the border. But you see, the roots of this hatred between Pakistan and the Taliban go way deeper than just recent airstrikes. To fully understand why they're at each other's throats today, you have to go all the way back to 2001, when the United States invaded Afghanistan following the 9/11 attacks, aiming to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban regime that had sheltered Osama bin Laden. In the 1990s, Pakistan had actually been one of the Taliban's biggest supporters, not necessarily because they agreed with their extremist ideology, but because they saw the Taliban as strategically valuable. A Taliban-controlled Afghanistan meant significant Pakistani influence over its neighbor, but 9/11 changed all that. Suddenly, under intense US pressure, Pakistan was forced to make a choice, and predictably, Islamabad switched sides overnight. Pakistan abandoned the Taliban, opening its territory for NATO supply routes, allowing US drone strikes against militants on Pakistani soil and providing crucial intelligence to the Americans. Practically overnight, Pakistan went from being the Taliban's key ally to actively helping hunt them down. But this backstabbing came with consequences, not from the Taliban or Afghanistan, but from their own Pakistani citizens. For many in Pakistan's tribal and conservative communities, the government's cooperation with America was seen as a betrayal of fellow Muslims. Soon enough, anti-American feelings surged, radical ideas spread quickly, and militant groups multiplied, capitalizing on widespread anger against the Pakistani government. Among the new groups that emerged, the Taliban-Pakistan, or TTP, quickly became the most dangerous. Formed in late 2007, the TTP declared war on Pakistan's government and military, accusing them of siding with the Americans and betraying Islamic interests. Initially based in Pakistan's tribal belt, particularly North and South Waziristan, the TTP rapidly recruited thousands of fighters, attracting young men angry at their government's perceived betrayal. From 2008 to 2014, Pakistan went through some of the darkest days in its history. The TTP launched relentless terror campaigns, systematically attacking schools, markets, mosques, and military installations across the country. The darkest day came in December of 2014, when TTP fighters stormed an army-run school in Peshawar, massacring over 140 students and teachers. This horrific event pushed Pakistan to launch Operation Zab-e-Azab, a massive military offensive designed to destroy TTP strongholds near the Afghan border. Although the offensive successfully dismantled the local militant networks and eliminated hundreds of fighters, many TTP insurgents simply fled across the border to Afghanistan. Once there, they found refuge in remote mountainous regions, often protected by Afghan Taliban factions sympathetic to their cause. When the Afghan Taliban reclaimed power in Kabul in August of 2021, everything changed again. The Taliban leadership hadn't forgotten Pakistan's actions after 9/11. So, as a form of payback, they turned to a long-standing territorial dispute known as the Durand Line, a colonial-era boundary drawn by the British in the 19th century, a border that Afghanistan, including the Taliban, has never officially recognized. For decades, this border issue had stayed somewhat dormant, overshadowed by other regional conflicts. But the Taliban needed a compelling excuse to ramp up their hostility towards Pakistan, and the Durand Line offered exactly that. To make things even worse, in the mid-2010s, Pakistan began fencing off the entire length of the border to restrict movement, reopening old wounds in a very public and painful way. For the Taliban, this fence was an insult, a physical scar, illegitimately dividing Pashtun tribal lands. Almost immediately after retaking power in 2021, Taliban fighters began confronting Pakistani troops installing the fence. They tore down sections and even seized coils of barbed wire, openly challenging Pakistan's authority. At times, tensions escalated into direct clashes, including exchanges of artillery and mortar fire. To Pakistan's military, which firmly considers the Durand Line as an internationally recognized border, the Taliban's aggressive defiance became a huge security threat. Now, fast forward to 2025. Both Pakistan and Afghanistan are deploying thousands upon thousands of troops along this very Durand Line, reinforcing positions and preparing for further escalation. The Pakistani Prime Minister has repeatedly condemned and warned the Taliban. But the Taliban knows that in Pakistan, prime ministers or politicians don't hold real power. The military does. Just a few months earlier, in June of 2025, US President Donald Trump made an extraordinary gesture that showed the Pakistani army's dominance. Trump hosted General Munir alone for a private White House meeting, the first time an American president met Pakistani's army chief without any civilian Pakistani leaders present, something that's almost unheard of in diplomacy. Whether it's economic policy, trade deals, or dealing with insurgencies and threats like the Taliban, it's the Pakistani army that's ultimately in charge. And Pakistan's army, embarrassed and frustrated after years of heavy losses against the TTP, has increasingly felt the need to take matters into its own hands. That's why on October 9th, at around 9:50 p.m., Pakistan carried out a targeted airstrike in Kabul aimed directly at Nur Wali Masood, the notorious leader of the TTP. Pakistani intelligence believed they had a once-in-a-lifetime shot to eliminate Masood while he traveled by vehicle in Kabul. Details of what happened next are still unclear. Afghan sources and local journalists claim the strike was precise and lethal, possibly killing Masood along with other senior TTP commanders. However, the TTP immediately denied Masood's death, releasing an audio message to prove he had survived. Within hours, the Taliban's defense ministry officially accused Pakistan of carrying out the airstrike, laying the groundwork for a counterattack. And that's precisely what we saw happen. The October 11th assault was their direct retaliation. Under the leadership of the Taliban Defense Ministry spokesman, the same official who had once proudly stopped the border fence construction, the Afghan Taliban decided to send a message in the language Pakistan understands: force. Late on the night of the 11th, Taliban units opened fire at Pakistani border posts in at least 7 different places. Initially, Pakistani authorities kept quiet about their losses, but after Taliban-linked sources began boasting online about dozens of Pakistani casualties, Islamabad rushed not to win the fight, but to control the narrative on social media. Even the Taliban hasn't yet disclosed their own casualties. What is clear, though, is that both sides suffered heavy losses, largely due to the Taliban's element of surprise. Realistically speaking, for all their tough talk, the Afghan Taliban don't have the capacity to wage a sustained conventional war against Pakistan's well-equipped military. And Pakistan knows full well that pushing the Taliban too aggressively risks collapsing any cooperation and further destabilizing its western frontier. At its core, the conflict, the Taliban's sheltering of TTP militants, Pakistan's cross-border airstrikes, and the historic dispute over the Durand Line, remains unresolved and highly explosive. This means any de-escalation right now would likely just be temporary, a pause rather than a genuine peace. Whether this conflict will soon turn into an all-out war is uncertain. But one thing we do know for sure is that China stands to lose no matter what happens next. Pakistan has long been China's strongest regional ally, closely linked through decades of strategic partnerships, diplomatic support, and billions of dollars in economic investments. But for China, the Taliban is also a potential future ally. Afghanistan is home to huge reserves of valuable minerals, including lithium, copper, and rare earth elements, exactly the materials China desperately needs to build smartphones, electric cars, and advanced technology it exports globally. Since the Taliban retook Kabul, China has steadily strengthened its ties with them, providing financial aid, investments, and diplomatic backing. In exchange, China expects security guarantees and favorable access to Afghanistan's mineral riches. Chinese firms, backed by their government, have already begun exploring commercial operations across Afghanistan, hoping to secure control of resources critical to China's economic future and its technological rivalry with the US. This leaves China trapped between two uncomfortable friendships. If Beijing openly sides with Pakistan, it risks jeopardizing its growing relationship with the Taliban and losing access to valuable Afghan resources. On the other hand, if China backs the Taliban openly, it would mean betraying Pakistan, a trusted ally where China has invested tens of billions of dollars. For China, it's a classic lose-lose situation, and they know it.